What would you do if the person you trusted most betrayed you, and everyone around you acted like it was no big deal? This is the story of how I turned heartbreak into my greatest comeback, proving that even in the darkest moments, there's a chance to start over. I leaned back in my chair, taking in the room around me. It was filled with so many beautiful women. My mind drifted as I thought, why did Mark Lavalier choose my wife? Why did Linda say yes? Why did she leave me? Our children were growing older, becoming more self-sufficient, and soon, they wouldn't be home at all. Linda and I had talked many times about what life would look like once the kids were out of the house. We had made plans I thought we'd share together. But now, as I sat there, a nagging realization crept into my mind. What if Linda's plans for the future didn't include me? It was a thought that hit me like a ton of bricks, leaving me stunned and feeling like a complete fool. In that moment, my sadness and disappointment evaporated, replaced by a rising tide of anger. The worried glances from the people around the table told me that my face must have betrayed my emotions. It was obvious that something was boiling under the surface. Sitting across from me, asked nervously, "Are you okay, Jim?" Over Da's shoulder, I caught sight of 4 young women seated in a booth on the far side of the dance floor. They were laughing, carefree and full of life. For a moment, I couldn't stop myself from wondering, why didn't Mark Lavalier choose one of them? I stared at them briefly, and then, unexpectedly, I burst out laughing. The sound came deep and uncontrollable, startling everyone at the table. My laughter grew louder, tears streaming down my face as people from nearby tables turned to look at us. The others at my table looked on, clearly unnerved. When I finally calmed down, I wiped my eyes and gave them all a broad smile. I realized something in that moment: my life had just changed in a way I could never undo. Everything was different now. I realized something profound: I was no longer in a monogamous relationship. I didn't have to worry about my wife's feelings anymore because, clearly, Linda had stopped caring about mine. The weight of that truth settled over me like a cold, heavy blanket. Everyone at the table stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. I smiled at the kind of smile that probably unnerved her. Then, without hesitation, I slid my wedding ring off my finger, holding it out to her. "When you see Linda," I said, handing her the ring, "give this to her. I've got things to do." Before anyone could respond, I stood up and tossed a $10 bill on the table. "That's for my drink. Since you're so good at encouraging Linda's cheating, you can cover the rest." As I turned and left, I heard their voices calling after me, but I didn't stop. Outside the club, the cool night air hit my face, sharpening my thoughts. I wondered what I would say if any of them followed me. The one thing I knew for certain was this: if one of the husbands came after me and ignored my warning, I wouldn't hesitate to break his nose. My mind raced as I walked. Linda had decided she was going to have her selfish fun, so why shouldn't I do the same? When I reached the hotel, I approached the young woman at the front desk and asked if there were any full-sized suites available. She checked her system and replied, "We don't have any full-sized suites left, but we do have a honeymoon suite available. It's spacious and comes with several amenities." I cut her off with a nod. "I'll take it." She hesitated briefly, then added, "You know, since it's late at night, we won't be able to rent out your current room again. You'd be paying for both." "That's fine," I said curtly. "My wife will be staying in the original room, and I'll be in the suite." Her brows furrowed, and for a moment, she gave me a strange look. "I thought you were doing something special for your wife," she said with a faint, questioning smile. After she handed me the key card and explained how to get to my new room, I leaned in slightly and added, "If my wife asks for a key to my room, don't give it to her. In fact, could you make sure no one tells her I'm still here if she asks?" The young woman's curious expression lingered, her lips curving into an intrigued smile. She nodded. "Understood." As I headed to the suite, I realized I wasn't just stepping into a new room, I was stepping into an entirely new phase of my life. "I'll make sure the hotel staff is informed of your request," the front desk attendant assured me. I took the elevator up to my old room and packed my clothes, leaving all of Linda's belongings, clothes, toiletries, and anything remotely personal, dumped into the trash cans without a second thought. It felt cathartic, like clearing away the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. From there, I rode up to the top floor, where the honeymoon suite awaited. It was enormous, with elegant furnishings and a jacuzzi on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The view alone was worth the splurge. It was like standing on top of the world, a reminder that I could still claim some semblance of control in my life. I'd packed an expensive tuxedo for what I had imagined would be a romantic evening with Linda. Instead, I decided to put it to use for myself. I slipped into the crisp black jacket, adjusted my tie, and headed back out, stopping by an ATM to withdraw some cash. When I returned to the club, a long line snaked around the entrance. I ignored the queue entirely and walked straight to the doorman as though I owned the place. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "Can I help you?" With a smile, I handed him a $100 bill. His demeanor shifted instantly as he pocketed the money, smiling back and pulling the door open for me. Once inside, I scanned the room. My former friends were still gathered at the same table, their laughter and conversation faltering when they saw me. They noticed me immediately, waving and calling out my name. The others turned to stare, but I acted as though they weren't even there. My focus was elsewhere. I was searching for that table I'd noticed earlier, the one near the dance floor with the 4 stunning women. I spotted them again, still seated without any men around. It must have been some kind of bachelorette celebration. Perfect, I thought. I strode through the club, my movements deliberate and casual, my eyes fixed on the women. They continued to call after me, her voice cutting through the hum of music and chatter, but I didn't so much as glance in her direction. Reaching the table, I gave the women a warm smile. "For what reason," I asked, "are 4 beautiful ladies sitting here unaccompanied?" They all smiled back at me, and the tallest brunette laughed loudly, clearly tipsy. "We're here with our girlfriend," she said. The stupid guy left her for some expletive, and we're cheering her on. Her candor and the energy at the table made me grin. This night might turn out to be more interesting than I expected. "Well, if you don't mind, ladies," I said with a confident smile, "I'd love to dance with your friend and do my part to cheer her up." The brunette chuckled, and the petite redhead, Samantha, smiled warmly and extended her hand for me to help her out of the booth. I guided her to the dance floor, where the upbeat music gave us the perfect rhythm to start moving together. As we danced, I asked, "So, what's your name?" "Samantha," she replied with a grin. "Well, Samantha, I'm Jim," I said, flashing my best smile. "How could you have dated such an idiot that he let a woman as beautiful as you go? He must be a real fool." She laughed, her cheeks flushing slightly, and we continued dancing while chatting. I learned she was studying to become a nurse and had grown up not far from here. She was easy to talk to, and the conversation flowed naturally. The song transitioned into a slower tune, but neither of us left the floor. Samantha stepped a little closer, and we continued to dance, moving in sync to the softer music. As we swayed, she looked up at me and asked, "So, Jim, are you married?" "We broke up," I admitted, keeping my tone light despite the heaviness of the topic. "Was it your wife who danced with Mark Lavalier earlier?" She pressed. I noticed she disappeared after that dance. I raised an eyebrow, impressed. "You noticed that?" She gave a small shrug. "Everyone in the club noticed it, Jim." I offered her a wry smile. "Well, I think you found out we broke up at the exact moment I did." Samantha smiled warmly at me, her eyes full of understanding. We danced close until the end of the song, a quiet comfort passing between us. Both of us had been hurt by people we cared about, and in that moment, it felt good to hold each other and just be. When the song ended, we returned to her table. Samantha turned to the group and said, I know we agreed, no men sitting with us, but I want Jim to stay. The brunette smirked, clearly enjoying herself. I don't know, we did make a deal, she teased. How about I buy a couple of bottles of champagne to make up for it? I offered, grinning at the challenge. She pretended to mull it over. Tempting, but a deal's a deal. Samantha smiled at the group, her tone cutting through the mock debate. We saw Mark Lavalier leave with his wife. Immediately, all three ladies chimed in unison, not a thing. The group laughed, their good spirits contagious. Samantha looped her arm through mine and declared loudly, to hell with it. You're with me tonight. We all clinked glasses as I ordered champagne for the table. With laughter and bubbly flowing, the evening took on a sense of freedom and fun. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't carrying the weight of my recent heartbreak alone. The evening was a blur of laughter, drinks, and camaraderie. I shared a few jokes with the group, and they fired back with plenty of their own. The atmosphere was electric as we laughed together, and the women danced with various men, and occasionally with each other. Through it all, Samantha stayed by my side, her arm resting comfortably around me as if we had known each other for years. Towards the end of the night, Christ suddenly stood up, anger flashing in her eyes, and stormed away from the table. I had a hunch she was upset because she and the others secretly wanted me to forgive Linda. Maybe it was to ease their own consciences about the situation. Before I could dwell on it, Samantha turned to me, her eyes sparkling with mischief. For this, I have to kiss you, she declared. Oh no, you shouldn't. I teased, grinning. But Samantha wasn't one to hesitate. She grabbed my face and kissed me hard on the lips, the kind of kiss that leaves no room for uncertainty. Her friends cheered her on, their laughter ringing out across the room. When she finally pulled back, she smiled sweetly at me, her expression full of warmth. Kim, one of the other girls, leaned in with a smirk. Get a room, you two. Well, actually, I said, chuckling, I have a suite at a hotel just down the block. And judging by the way you ladies are enjoying yourselves, it doesn't look like you'll be driving anytime soon. If we hurry, we can still order champagne to the room. Their excitement was immediate, and after I paid the bar tab, the four of us made our way to the hotel. The suite was perfect, complete with a jacuzzi on the balcony. Samantha stuck close to me, her hand clasping mine, her smile never wavering. There was a knock at the door, and the champagne arrived, adding another layer of celebration to the night. We popped open the bottles, and the women joked and giggled, their energy infectious. At one point, Susan teased me about being overdressed, urging me to take off my tuxedo. I laughed and shook my head. I'm keeping Samantha company, I said, throwing a wink her way. The group turned their attention to Samantha, encouraging her to get into the jacuzzi. But she only smiled, pulling me toward the bedroom instead. As we walked off, her friends sang a playful rendition of the wedding march, their laughter following us. The mood was light and easy, a stark contrast to the stormy emotions that had marked the start of my night. Samantha and I shared a smile as we left the others to enjoy the jacuzzi and the rest of the suite. Eventually, after everyone had showered and shared their last laughs, the other women left. Samantha, however, lingered. Would you mind giving me a ride home? She asked softly. As I drove her home, she snuggled up to me, resting her head against my shoulder. Jim, she said quietly, her voice laced with sincerity, I know what your wife did was terrible. But if you decide not to go back to her, I'd love the chance to see you again. She smiled at me, hopeful and patient, as we pulled up to her place. Her words stayed with me as I watched her disappear into the night. The decision ahead felt monumental, but for the first time in what felt like ages, I didn't feel entirely alone. I turned and saw her standing there, and for a moment, it was as though nothing had changed. Linda looked exactly the same, her blue dress draped elegantly over her, her dark hair flowing down her back in soft waves, her posture poised and confident. The rings on her fingers glittered under the light, and her face held the same serene expression I'd always known. It was surreal, almost impossible. I expected to see some kind of difference, some sign of the betrayal she had committed the night before. There should have been a shadow of guilt, a flicker of shame in her eyes, something to reflect what had happened. But no, she stood there as if nothing had transpired, as if she hadn't spent the night and morning tearing apart everything we'd built together. This is impossible, I thought. My mind raced for an explanation. How could she seem so, untouched by it all? Linda spoke, her voice bright and filled with excitement. He's rich and famous. He could have any woman he wants, but last night, when he asked me to dance, I felt like the most popular girl in the room. He made me feel so special. She was beaming, her mind clearly replaying moments from the previous night. Her words hit me like a blow to the chest. She was completely lost in her own thoughts, reliving her time with Mark Lavalier as if it were the highlight of her life. That was the moment it became clear to me, it was truly over. Linda would always treasure her time with Mark more than any moment she ever shared with me. To her, I was just an afterthought. I couldn't stop the anger from creeping into my voice as I said, "Then go, Linda." My expression must have mirrored the edge in my tone because she finally moved, packing her things quickly. Without another word, she left, her figure disappearing down the street. As soon as she was out of sight, I set my plan into motion. Seeing her standing there in that blue dress, completely unchanged, had given me an epiphany. If she wasn't going to change, then I needed to. I called my boss and requested 2 weeks off, then headed to the hardware store. I bought wood, drywall, paint, and 2 exterior doors. I also rented a truck to haul everything back home. Once I was there, I set to work with determination, grabbing my tools and starting to rebuild, not just the house, but my life. Every day, I called my kids to let them know I was working around the house. They didn't need to know all the details, just that I was okay. Linda kept trying to reach out, asking to talk, but I wasn't interested in hearing anything she had to say. Not now. A few days into my solitude, I picked up the phone and called Samantha. Her voice on the other end was like a balm to my frayed nerves. "I thought you forgot about me," she teased, her tone playful yet warm. "Not a chance," I replied. "I can't stop thinking about you." "Are you going to ask me out on a date, or what?" she asked, laughing softly. "No," I said, matching her teasing tone. "I'm not going to ask you out." "Stop teasing me," she exclaimed, her laughter ringing in my ears. "I'm serious," I said, my voice softening. "I'm not going to ask you out because I'm going to tell you, I'd like to take you out. What do you say?" Her laughter turned into a gentle sigh, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I say yes. For the first time in a long while, hope stirred within me. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. I had been thinking more and more about leaving for a while, starting fresh somewhere far away. But first, I needed to finalize the changes I had already started at home. The interior wall separating the duplex was complete, dividing the house into 2 separate living spaces. For now, the gas and electricity were still shared, but I knew I would eventually have to separate them completely. At least Linda wouldn't be able to shut off utilities to my side. On Wednesday night, I called Linda and told her to bring the kids home in the morning. Thursday morning came, and I locked up my part of the house before sitting on a chair out front to wait for them. When their car pulled into the driveway and they got out, they all stood on the front lawn in stunned silence, staring at the obvious changes to the house. Emma was the first to speak. "Dad, what did you do?" I simply smiled and gestured for them to come inside. Once we were settled in the kitchen for lunch, Emma couldn't hold back her curiosity. "Dad, what's this all about?" she asked. I noticed she was watching Linda's reaction as much as she was waiting for my answer. It was clear that Emma and Tommy had spent the last few days with their mother trying to pry answers from her, only to be met with evasion. "Oh, I said lightly, we're getting closer to becoming empty nesters. I realize things won't stay the same forever, so I'm just getting ready. That's all." Emma wasn't buying it. "Dad, you could at least discuss this with us first to see how we feel about it." The kids finished their lunch quickly and headed for the door, eager to retreat to their rooms. I wondered if they noticed that I didn't say goodbye to their mother, who remained in her bedroom the entire time. Later that day, I picked up Samantha from her apartment, and we hit the road. It turned out to be one of the best weekends of my life. We flew first class, stayed at a 5-star resort, and were pampered like royalty. The weekend was filled with sun, sand, waves, incredible food, and endless drinks. But what made it unforgettable was Samantha. She was radiant, her joy evident in every laugh and smile. She constantly found ways to show how much she appreciated being with me, and her gratitude made the entire trip feel surreal. By the time we returned home, I felt renewed, almost as if I had reclaimed a part of myself that I thought I'd lost. Once back, I continued making my new life a reality. Linda tried to push boundaries, but I made it clear where things stood. One evening, she wandered over to my side of the house, clearly testing the waters. "You're not welcome on this side," I said firmly, not leaving any room for argument. Linda froze, her shock evident as she stared at me. For a moment, she seemed unsure of what to do, but then she turned and quietly walked back to her side. The reality that we were truly living apart, even under the same roof, had finally sunk in for her. The divide between us was no longer just emotional, it was physical, and it was permanent. As I sat in my kitchen later that evening, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The changes weren't just about creating separate living spaces, they were about taking control of my life again. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly on my way to something better. Linda sat across the table from me, her voice trembling as she said, "I love you, and I want everything to go back to normal." I sighed, meeting her gaze directly. "It won't happen," I said, my tone firm but calm. "Why not?" she asked, her face a mixture of confusion and desperation. "Because," I began, "if you haven't noticed yet, you did something that changed the way I feel about you forever. And it's not something that can be undone." She opened her mouth to argue, but I raised a hand to stop her. "It shouldn't be like this." "You're right. It shouldn't. But that doesn't change what is. You had plenty of chances, Linda. Chances to minimize your betrayal, to try and talk me out of my anger, or even to shame me for feeling betrayed. You could have accused me of not putting the family before my own pain, like I'm the one who's failing us. But here's the thing, I seem to be the only one who is ever expected to be fair in this relationship." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought she might understand. She reached out across the table, taking my hand in hers and holding it tightly with both of her own. I let her hold it, but I didn't move. I looked deep into her eyes, knowing that what I was about to say would hurt her. But she needed to hear it, needed to understand exactly how things were going to be from now on. "Linda," I said carefully, "you need to know how this is going to work. Our relationship is never going back to what it was. I won't pretend everything's fine, and I won't act like this didn't happen. You destroyed my trust, and with it, the foundation of what we had." She glared at me as I finished speaking, her anger rising with every word. I saw it clearly, and the faint smirk that crept onto my face only seemed to make it worse. Her eyes burned with fury, and she opened her mouth, finger pointing at me, ready to unleash some soul-searing condemnation. But the moment she saw my smirk widen, she stopped, her anger faltering. I leaned back, my expression softening slightly as I took a deep breath, willing myself to focus on the children and keep my emotions in check. I let the grin fade from my face and continued in a measured tone. "Why do you think your love is important to me after what you did?" I asked, holding her gaze. "It's obvious that my love for you meant nothing to you when it mattered most. So why should I value yours now?" Tears welled in her eyes, and her voice cracked as she whispered, "But I don't want to lose you." I shook my head, my voice steady but tinged with sadness. "Then I don't understand why you thought you could completely destroy my trust and expect to keep me. You took me for granted, Linda. And now, you don't deserve me." She looked at me, utterly confused, as though the reality of my words was only beginning to sink in. I could see the pain in her expression, but for once, it didn't move me. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I stood at the door, keys in hand, and told Linda, "I'm heading to my side of the house. I've still got a lot of work to do over there, but I'll be back for dinner with you and the kids. Please let them know." As I left, Emma trailed behind me. "Dad, are you and Mom getting a divorce?" she asked, her voice small but heavy with worry. I sighed and stopped to face her. "No, Emma," I said gently. "We're just separated. For now, it's better this way." "But Mom doesn't say anything no matter how many times we ask her," she said, frustration creeping into her tone. "I understand," I said. "That's why I decided to make it clear, I didn't want to just be a weekend dad. Splitting the house means I'm here for you and Tommy whenever you need me. You two can live on either side, wherever you feel most comfortable." Before we could continue, Linda poked her head through the front door. "Dinner's ready," she announced flatly. The meal was tense, the air heavy with unspoken words. The kids were picking up on more than Linda seemed to realize. We ate in silence until Tommy, unable to hold back any longer, blurted out his thoughts. After dinner, I decided to check on them. First, I went to Tommy's room. He was lying on his bed, texting with his friends. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, sitting at the edge of his bed. He shrugged, not looking up. "No, not really," he mumbled. I nodded, giving his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before heading to Emma's room. Emma was a different story. She sat on her bed, angry and crying. "Why did she do this, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sat beside her and sighed. "That's something you'd have to ask your mom," I said gently. "But I can't just forgive her, Emma. If I did, I'd never be able to forgive myself." Emma wiped her eyes and nodded reluctantly. "I know, but I just want us to stay together as a family." I put my arm around her and pulled her into a hug. "We are together," I said. "I just won't sleep in the same room as your mother anymore." She hugged me tightly, and we whispered that we loved each other before I left her to rest. Over the following weeks, my side of the house transformed into a sleek, modern bachelor pad. A giant TV, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, and stylish new furniture made it feel like a fresh start. I even bought myself a top-of-the-line convertible, something I'd always wanted. Linda noticed the changes and cornered me one day. "Jim, can we afford all of this? That car must have cost a fortune." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Well, Linda," I began, "my old car was 8 years older than yours. I needed something new. You've always replaced your car twice as often as I have, so I guess I just invested a few of those skipped upgrades into this one." She frowned, clearly unsettled. "And everything else? The furniture, the gadgets?" "Oh, that's easy. Samantha helped me pick those out. We have very similar tastes." Linda's forced smile faltered at the mention of Samantha, and her hand slipped from my shoulder. "Oh," she said, her voice strained. "I was just wondering." Then she turned and walked away without another word. I hadn't mentioned Samantha to provoke Linda, but the truth was, Samantha was becoming a significant part of my life. I realized how often I thought about Samantha now, how her presence brightened my days, while Linda's feelings rarely crossed my mind. One evening at dinner, Linda brought it up again. "It's not fair, Jim," she said, her tone sharp. "This is the only time we get to be together as a family. Shouldn't we focus on that?" I set down my fork and met her gaze. Fair? I asked. Okay, let's talk about fair, Linda. The truth is, Samantha is becoming an important part of my life, and I want her to be more involved. She gets along great with the kids, and she's brought a lot of positivity into my life. That's the reality. Linda's expression tightened, but she said nothing. I could tell the words stung, but I wouldn't apologize for finally prioritizing my happiness. It was time for everyone to adapt to the new normal. I don't think excluding Samantha from our family dinners is fair, I said firmly, leaning forward to meet Linda's gaze. It's not fair to her, it's not fair to me, and it's not fair to the kids. If you want to exclude her, then you're going to have to exclude me too. Linda stiffened, her face tightening with frustration. But, Jim, she began, but I held up a hand to stop her. Linda, your honesty has always been questionable, I said plainly. You've shown time and again that you've put your feelings above everyone else's, including mine. So now, I'm going to prioritize what makes me happy, even if that means it doesn't align with your expectations. Life continued with Samantha becoming a more significant presence in my life and, eventually, the family's. The kids, especially Tommy, warmed to her quickly. That acceptance, I think, was bolstered by his newfound confidence after a memorable summer. It was a small gathering at the pool when Christ, one of the girls, jokingly challenged Tommy to a friendly competition. The goal? Who could get the most attention from the opposite sex? Christ's playful energy and flirtatious antics were in full swing, but her choice of revealing swimwear became her downfall. Her large chest made it impossible to keep everything contained in smaller outfits, which became more amusing than alluring at times. Christ ultimately stole the show by playfully kissing Tommy on the cheek in the pool, leaning in a bit too close. The poor kid was stuck in the water for a solid 10 minutes afterward, blushing furiously despite the cold. To everyone watching, it was clear Tommy had won the competition, earning a massive confidence boost in the process. That summer marked a turning point for him. He carried that newfound self-assurance into school, eventually finding a girlfriend who quickly became the focus of his attention. When Christ and the other girls met her, their teasing shifted into approval, and Tommy beamed with pride at how well his new world fit together. Samantha's integration into my life brought its own set of challenges. I often sensed a subtle tension in her, an internal conflict I couldn't quite pinpoint. I knew I was a perfect match for her personality and values, but the difference in our ages seemed to gnaw at her in quiet moments. I tried to address it gently, pointing out that building walls with a long list of impossible standards would only keep her isolated. Trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship, Samantha, I told her one evening. And sometimes, holding people to an unreachable ideal means shutting out the very things that could bring you happiness. She nodded, her gaze distant. I couldn't help but feel like my own efforts to prove my worth, something I had done too often in my relationship with Linda, had left Samantha taking me for granted. Maybe she thought men like me were a dime a dozen. But I resolved to keep my focus on what felt right, instead of losing myself to someone else's doubts. Meanwhile, karma seemed to find its way back to certain people. A few months later, I overheard that Christ and some of her friends had taken their girls' night out to a new club known for hosting celebrities, including none other than Mark Lavalier. The decision came without informing their husbands, sparking quiet whispers of dissatisfaction among their circles. As one of Dave's friends at work recounted the story, I couldn't help but marvel at how life has a way of balancing the scales. Some people choose to chase fleeting thrills, unaware of the quiet costs they accrue. For me, the focus was clear, rebuilding my life with purpose, embracing the love and connections that truly mattered, and letting the rest fall where it may. One evening, while chatting with Dave, I casually mentioned that I had seen the dancing with Mark Lavalier at the club. Dave seemed unfazed, even remarking that Mark had disappeared about an hour later, the same time the group of ladies left the club. However, Dave's friend noted that he hadn't actually seen the leave with the group, leaving the circumstances murky. Still, everyone remembered the evening Mark Lavalier had approached our table. The way their wives encouraged Linda's behavior, praising her for seizing an opportunity, left a bad taste in my mouth. It was clear that the group had built a dynamic of enabling one another, cloaked under the guise of playful permissiveness. After Linda attended that first bachelorette party, the husbands couldn't ignore what was happening. At first, some of them joked about the extra stimulation they were getting in the bedroom, a side effect of the gossip and fantasies Linda stirred by talking openly about her escapades with Mark. But within a few months, cracks began to show. One of the husbands, emboldened by drinks and frustration, joked to another about how much he resented the effect it had on his marriage. The comment struck a nerve. The recipient, clearly not in the mood, hit him where it hurt, both figuratively and literally. As for Mark Lavalier, his luck ran out in a shocking turn of events. After another night of charm and recklessness, he crossed the wrong husband. The man retaliated with brutal precision, delivering a blow that left Mark writhing in pain. The incident escalated, and in a confrontation captured on video, Mark's kneecaps were shattered. Despite the evidence, no charges were ever filed. Too many husbands had motives and means, making it impossible to pinpoint guilt. Mark lost the ability to walk, and his once glamorous life faded into obscurity. The last time Linda and I spoke about us was the day Emma moved out. By then, we were already divorced. I had rented out my part of the house and relocated to a condo by the sea. Linda tried to reflect on our past, recounting the ways she had loved the life we'd built together. "You always cared about how I felt," she said. "You gave me security, let me pursue what I wanted. But more than anything, you trusted me without a doubt." I stared at her, my heart cold to her words. "And now," I replied, "you love me more because you know you'll never find anyone else who would make you as happy as I once did. No one will ever love you like I did." Linda didn't respond. She simply sat there, her hand gripping the edge of the table as though holding on for stability. Later that evening, I saw Samantha across the room at a gathering. Her expression was soft, tinged with sadness. When our eyes met, her smile lit up the room. It was the kind of smile that reminded me of who I was, a man still capable of giving and receiving love, someone with a future worth fighting for. In that moment, I knew. My past with Linda was a chapter that had closed, and Samantha was the beginning of something new. A future where I could pour my love and devotion into someone who truly valued it. With a renewed sense of purpose, I climbed into my convertible and drove away, a big smile on my face. As the cool night air rushed through the open windows, I couldn't wait to get home, ready to embrace the life that awaited me with open arms.